Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with John Armstrong. John Armstrong is the real deal. He's a performer, he's a creator, he's a lecturer. You might recognize John from a magic lecture that he did for your club or a nearby magic shop. You might recognize him from the Magic Castle. You might recognize him from Penn & Teller's Fool Us, and you might just recognize him because he's often carrying around a little tiny plunger. This was a wonderful episode. We got into the nitty-gritty of how to grow, how to get better, how to perform for small audiences and big audiences, and he was incredibly honest about the transition into virtual and some of the challenges for a real life in-person performer. I loved the episode. I learned a lot, and I know you will too. Here it is, a wonderful time with the one and only John Armstrong. John, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. I mean, that is a loaded question these days. That is a loaded question, but I am okay, and I will say that I'm okay, but we could get into what's really going on at some point later on.
I think we will. I would say overall, are you doing well?
I have a healthy, happy little daughter. My wife is good. I am actually healthy. I just found out today that my COVID test came back negative, so I am okay.
That is a wonderful thing to hear at a time like this. And I am excited to chat with you because we've connected quite a few times over the years in different ways. And I've looked forward to this, and it's funny. You're one of the people, you were in Toronto, you were lecturing, and I said, oh, let's sit down. And we both pulled up our calendars, and it was impossible because you were just like, I'm going to be on cruises. I'm going to be at like, reach out to me in 6 months or something. And that makes sense. It's happened to me before. And it's funny because sometimes COVID, although it's been very negative, has allowed a lot of different people to connect and a lot of advice to be reached from people who might not be able to share it. So I'm grateful that you're able to take the time right now to chat with me. And let's dive into it. Let's talk about magic. How did you get started?
I grew up in Orlando, Florida, around theme parks, things like that. The joke I say in my show is I grew up in a theme park, and the theme of that park was trailer. Yeah, but anyway. I went to Disney a lot and all the other theme parks, and I just fell in love with the magicians that I saw because there was performers who were performing, and then also like how the effects would work in the Haunted Mansion, like how the ghosts were following me and all the things that happened, in that ride. So I love it that I started practicing and learning some stuff, and then when I was 14, I saw my first, what I like to say, real magician. I think that's kind of negative to some of the other magicians I saw, but the guy, and he would just do it with cards and coins, and he was right in front of you. He wasn't on a stage. It wasn't about illusions or anything like that. And his name was Terry Ward, and I used to follow him around. And he eventually decided he was going to start teaching me, and he did, and that's where it all started. And from that point on, I was just 100% addicted to magic, and all I cared about was magic, and that's all I've ever done.
Wow. It's amazing. Like, obviously there's a lot of echoes in stories you hear in other ways, but the one thing that's interesting there is Florida.
Yeah.
There's a lot of crazy, magic that comes out of just existing in Florida.
This is true. Absolutely. No, I mean, there's a lot, and there was a huge group. What's interesting is that there's a really interesting group of magicians that were there were some old timers that were, big on cruise ships or did stage shows or touring acts or whatever. And they kind of retired to Orlando. And then there was a lot of guys who also had moved there just to do the theme parks. And then there was a lot of guys who were there just to do the corporate scene. And there were a lot of retirees who were amateurs, but who were not necessarily professional magicians, but they were magicians who had spent a lot of time doing magic or learning magic, and they had retired to Florida. So once again,
and by the way, now that's still, maybe not now, maybe 10 months ago, but that's still the case. I keep connecting with different magicians that live in Florida that have a full-time job doing magic, and they all do it a little bit of a different way. Maybe one's a family magician, one's a corporate magician, has a theater, and I know so many people like that. I don't know what it is about Florida.
Yeah, there was always this large group of people. Again, guys like Terry Ward and Chad Long and Giovanni Livera and Tim Glancy and all these guys who were down there who were just monsters. There was a guy that no one really has heard about, Hank Miller. And Hank, his job was to be the 8-minute act in this dinner show doing a magic act. But what he was really good at was he was one of the best sleight of hand card guys you've ever seen in your entire life. But he never did any of that stuff. What he did was his 8-minute act, twice a night, and he was the guy, he was so willing to show off that stuff there was tons and tons and tons of people like that in that area who, and then now like you got like, there's Costa and all those other guys who are still in Orlando. So there's an amazing group. And I mean, me and Costa and all those other guys, we learned from the core that I'm talking about and sort of kind of grew up from there. Yeah.
Let's help us continue on the journey. I know sometimes for magicians, we like to be like, okay, I saw magic and then that was it. And then I became a magician. And I think sometimes there are, maybe some sticking points or sticking moments. So did you have any sticking moments when it came to doing it professionally? Was it a smooth transition, or was there any moments that kind of felt like you had to make a decision about, sticking with magic or something of that sort?
So to continue on the journey, I went from, learning magic with Terry. And then when I was 20, I got my own sort of like gig at Epcot doing magic, performing in a fake British accent and whatever. And then while I was there, whatever other magicians couldn't do, I ended up being like the second string. So then I ended up doing like street shows and stage shows and, walk around and themed shows as different characters. And like, it was basically the best 5-year university of magic I could have ever gone to, because all these other variety entertainers who, jugglers, clowns, whatever, were teaching me stuff, were talking to me about stuff, about performing, and I could learn from them, and then also just immediately go right out the next 2 minutes later and go out on set and apply the techniques that they were talking about. So it was really kind of incredible,
And how many like hours a day or week or so were you doing that?
My main gig at Disney at Epcot was 5 days a week, 5 shows a day. So 5 30-minute shows a day. And just shows, by the way, were just me doing sort of walk around magic and things like that. But they were set up so that I would constantly be performing. And then there was days, no joke, where I would do a morning at the Magic Kingdom doing walk around magic as a riverboat saloon guy, and then in the afternoon do a street magic at the Disney at the time it was called Downtown Disney, and then go from there and then do my 5 hours at Epcot. So it was like I would be doing magic all day because, again, I was filling in for everything and just sort of, taking it all in. And then after about 5 years, I got really cocky, man. There's no way around it. I got super cocky. I was this young kid who had spent all this time. I learned. I was like, all right, that's it. I'm going to move to Vegas because I heard they were giving out production shows in the airport, and I'm just going to go out and I'm going to go to Vegas because at that time, that's what everybody was doing. And so I left. And I went to Vegas, and to talk about down spurts, nothing, like everybody and their brother moved to Vegas at that time. And there was a huge downturn in that production shows. It was just when the thought of there was a time period where people were like, oh, Vegas is for families. And they were doing this Vegas was for families push. And that didn't work. So they were going the exact opposite direction. And so a lot of like the production shows or time stuff that would be like for more family audiences had gone out the window. And so I was stuck. No joke. I worked at the Liberace Museum. That was the only job that I could find, not as a magician, just like jockeying a cash register and giving tours. And so I did that. And I also worked at like Houdini's Magic Shop for like a heartbeat because I couldn't stand it. And I got myself fired because and I was just really low. And I was very lucky that I had made friends with some people who were nobodies at the time, but have become on to be huge people. Armando Lucero, Apollo Robbins, and a few other people like that. And they were all working at the Caesar's Magical Empire at the time. And they were like, oh, we should try to get you into here. And eventually they got me into being a dinner wizard, basically one of the walk-around performers there at that production show. And that was like a big, huge relief that I was actually able to do magic again, even though I had to do it in a toga and, and be ridiculous.
Seems like you were used to that, though.
I was used to doing it. So it was my Disney bona fides that helped me get that job for sure. And then what happened, this is the big thing. I ended up getting my first week at the Magic Castle during that time. So that was around like the year 2000. And I did my first week at the Magic Castle, and that seemed to go well. And I had a tape of that. And I had submitted my tape to be an actual like featured act in the Caesar's Magical Empire close-up room, which was called the Secret Pagoda. And so I put my tape in, didn't hear anything back, of course, because I was nobody. And just completely by random, an act that was supposed to finish out their week didn't show up on their last week, the first day of their last week. It didn't show up. Just didn't show up, meaning that the act that was there before had to do the entire link of all their shows. It was like, at that time, it would probably been around 14, 15 shows. They're like, they're not going to make that guy do the entire week like that. So they needed to find someone to replace him for the remaining 4 days. And my tape just so happened to be on top of the heap. I was in town. I had already was working there, so on and so forth. So they let me actually do the Secret Pagoda for those last 4 days. And those last 4 days were when I decided I was going to get everybody and their brother to come see what I did. And from there, I was able to actually transition out of being a walk-around performer into being a more permanent part of the headlining acts, and that's it. And so there's that was very good for me. And then as soon as that show closed, I left Vegas and then I moved to Los Angeles because I wanted to be around the Magic Castle. And again, I had to start back up again. So I was sleeping on couches. I was doing everything I possibly could to I was doing extra work. You go on a set and sit around and be a background actor. I was doing everything in my power just to be able to survive in Los Angeles, which was extremely more expensive living in than Las Vegas, just so I could be around the castle and soak that in and fall back in love with magic again. And then eventually because I spent all this extra time sitting at the Magic Castle, doing shows for people who would be around, giving out business cards, because back in that day you could still do that. That was a thing that people actually looked at, and doing all that kind of stuff. And that was built me up enough of a client base that I was able to then go out and do real gigs, and I was able to sustain myself, get my own apartment, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's where it all came from. And then so those were the really bad lulls. If you want to talk about right now, it's been I transferred about 5 years ago. I transferred from doing basically all close-up stuff to going on stage and being more of a stand-up magician, mostly working in the corporate, but extremely in the cruise ship market. I was supposed to this year do Disney Cruise Line, which is a line that I've been working now for a few years, and I became one of their top acts, which was nice. And I was going to do a week-on, week-off contract that was very lucrative. A high six-figure contract, high 5-figure contract, not 6 figures. I'm ridiculous. It was going to be great, and then that all went away. That all went away this year, and I got and then my wife was pregnant. We have a kid now, like I've mentioned. So we had the baby during COVID. I'm gonna be honest, man. I've been doing the virtual shows, and I've actually been pretty successful at that. But I've been becoming extremely skittish about things. I get panic attacks now. I've become sort of almost agoraphobic. And I'll just level with you. I was supposed to do I won't say the name, but I was supposed to do a very prominent magician's TV show. You could probably figure it out by reading in between the lines. And I had to cancel because for the week leading up to when I was, I had to do it or not do it thing. I was having daily, if not hourly, panic attacks because I was afraid of having to leave my wife and kid for that long. And go into this bubble that they were, going to do for the show. It was freaking me out. I still am not. I decided not to do it, and that helped out a lot of my stress. But I am still not there, man. It's not. It's been really, really tough on me, and I have to put on the happy face and do those shows. Because it's what I do, and I'm fortunate I've been able to do okay on the virtual show stuff. But I'm not joking, man. If I'm out of my house for more than a half an hour, I get heart palpitations and I freak out.
I feel you, and thank you for the honesty in a moment like this. At this moment, there's a lot of entertainers who are feeling very similarly, and it's easy for the whole thing to feel like even if you're having success or wins or whatever in the virtual space or pivoting or whatever the case may be, it certainly does feel like all the amazing things that we had planned and all the growth and whatever is just Thanos style gone. And it's hard to deal with because it just doesn't happen like that in life. Things don't happen like that. So it's very, very hard to overcome. So thank you for the honesty and clarity on what's happening right now. And I think a lot of people are feeling it. One thing that was on my mind when you were talking about your journey, and I think is incredibly relevant now, is that pivot to virtual. first you loved the close-up, and then you got an opportunity performing on stage and getting that sharp, and then your next opportunity was close. And it's kind of this thing back and forth where, because you can do multiple things, because you can do magic in many ways, you were able to take advantage of different opportunities. You could do a close-up room, you could be on stage, you can, if there's a TV opportunity, it's like, oh no, I can't do that. I can only do this. No, I have both. I can do material that's on stage and close up. And I think now we're seeing people have to make that similar thing with virtual, where obviously no one ever did virtual a year ago. And now we're all having to kind of figure it out. And it's like, okay, I do close up shows. I do social distance shows. I do virtual shows. I do,
right.
We all have to add another thing to our magical resume as it is. So before we talk about virtual, I'd love to hear about, the tool belt of close-up and stage and how that's kind of played a role in the journey so far.
Well, I wouldn't call myself a great magic creator. That's not really my strength. If I have a strength, it's really in eyeing and direction. I direct other acts. I've directed myself, of course, but I direct other acts and sort of a thing. And then as a researcher and developer, I have a very large retention of just general magic, and have always put a lot of constantly reading magic books and constantly researching things is something that I've been doing my whole life, and I'm very proud of. And being able to find all of the good things that are out there and put them together in the right order to make something out of it for myself. So because that's how I've always created magic. You're going to look. Not if you were to look at just the works of, let's say, Alan Ackerman or Simon Arison, that only gives you a very narrow view, not only of just card magic. A good view, because both of those creators are very smart when it comes to that, but that gives you a very narrow view of just card magic. But if you wanted to be just, as I was for a very long time, a cards-only magician, you were trying to find ways to make it have as much variety and universal appeal as possible, you wouldn't just look at just what's written about card magic. You would look at what's written about mentalism and stage magic and ball magic and coin magic. You would look at what's written about everything and see what you could apply to card magic. And because I had already looked at all of this other stuff and I had already seen all what was out there, it was very easy for me to sort of, when I decided I was going to pivot to do more of a stage magic act, that I could take what was out there and research it. And what I found during all of this research is that there's a lot has been written about stage magic, and I'm going to classify, just for this conversation, stage magic as big stage illusions and manipulation and birds and that type of thing. And then a lot's been written about stage magic. Even more, tons more have been written about close-up magic, but only a teeny amount has been written about parlor, platform, or stand-up magic. That if you compare it to the other branches that I've just mentioned in those sort of broad terms, it is such a small portion is what is written. And most of the classic go points for that came out of British music hall. So the idea of coming up on stage with smaller props and entertaining a larger crowd, that's the Billy McCombs, the Alan Jacksons, that's the Terry Seabrooks. That's really where most of that came from. And then if I decided to use that as my base, right? And I'm not the only person who did, Matt King and with Hayden, and I can go on, and all decided to use that as the base. And then that's where I came from. So I was going to try to take as much of this close-up material that I had created, I'm using that in the big quotation marks, close-up material that I had sort of, made my own or whatever, and then bring it into making it play as big as possible by trying to find some elements that made it a bigger than just tiny little ball going into tiny little cup. You know what I'm saying? So I'll give you an example of that using that exact great thing. So I do a trick in my act where I have which is essentially a chop cup. It's essentially a chop cup. But it's the greatest one-phase chop cup you'll ever see. There's one phase. And the premise of it is that I have this gigantic, ridiculous contraption. And I teach how this ridiculous traction works. It's basically an Abbott's hole-in-one. And I show this ridiculous thing. And then I do the chop cup, but they don't see the mechanics working. And that's the whole routine. So I took this big stage prop, this Abbott's hole-in-one, which is gigantic. No one would ever classify that as close-up in their life. and applied it to a tiny close-up trick to make that tiny close-up trick play out to the huge crowd so that everybody understood it. Even if they didn't see the exact thing of the ball, they knew the ball was there, and they knew it was because of something else other than this gigantic mechanical thing that they didn't see working. It's stuff like that I took all of the elements that I could find around me and built it into something that was able to retain my voice. I still wanted to retain my performance persona, whatever that is, from close-up into me being on stage. There was no daylight really between the two. I didn't want to be a completely different act. And the other thing that I avoided, just sort of to round out this conversation, I didn't want to be another mentalism. I didn't want to do a mentalist act. And don't get me wrong, I love mentalism, and I love mentalists, and I'm a big fan of all that magic. But what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to be yet another close-up guy that decided to become a mentalist, because that was definitely a transition. I called it they were all going through the mental pause. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do more prop-based apparatus as well as sleight of hand, and adding sleight of hand into that to make something more that was about magic, that was clear, pure visual magic, as opposed to it being about I'm reading your mind or bending the spoon or things like that.
I think that's phenomenal. And for me, it's something that I had a long time struggling with, the transition from close-up to, I guess, parlor. And
right.
You were somebody who I think repeatedly, it's impressive how you've done it. I saw you at the Magic Castle. I saw you lecture here. I saw you in a few other regards live. And it's always been impressive. I mean, even on Fool Us, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it's incredibly impressive how you play small objects to big audiences. And I wonder, how can somebody do that? If somebody has spent their whole life showing off their close-up magic to 1 to 2 people at a time, and now, maybe not now, but they are trying to show it to broader audiences, appeal to more people at once, get onto the stage. How would somebody do that? What are some ways that somebody can make that transition?
So I talk about this a lot, actually. So the first things first is to understand the difference in feeling, both to the audience and to yourself as the performer, of going from stand-up to close-up, okay? The other way around, going from close-up to stand-up. So the idea being is that magic in a close proximity is more casual, is more conversational. And then magic on stage, no matter how that stage is defined, is more presentational. And there is a different way that an audience reacts to presentations versus conversations. And so if you are used as a close-up performer to going into people and having them have these casual conversations with you, and then you go on stage and try to do essentially the same material, and they feel completely different, that makes you feel like you are doing something bad or lesser than. And that's the biggest hurdle to get over. And so how I would actually approach this in actual practical sense is that if close-up is in one side of the chart and stage magic is on the other side of the chart, and the direct middle is stand-up magic. I'm going to call the direct middle stand-up magic, okay? And then stand-up magic that errs towards close-up is parlor, and stand-up magic that errs towards a stage is platform, okay? That's what I'm going to use, right, for this terminology. So if you're doing stand-up magic, and you want to do stand-up magic, but you're already doing close-up magic, the first thing you should really start doing is performing in parlor situations. Perform close-up magic in parlor situations. So what I'm saying is, the moment you take a group of people and you sit them down in front of you, and you're standing in front of them, and even if you are not on a stage, you're just standing and they're sitting, and there's 10 people, the same 10 people that would be surrounding you, but now you have them sat in front of you, they're going to act differently than if they were standing around you. There's no difference in size of the props. There's no difference in the space. There's no difference in visibility. They can all see it the same way, but they're going to act differently. They're going to, because you are being presentational. It's just going to feel presentational because they're sitting and you're standing. That's just the dynamics of it. So what you need to do is to get used to that and then try to find ways to make your presentational material sound more conversational and get them to react in a more gregarious, and open manner than they would by being reserved by sitting down in front of you. And so that's a transition. So the way that I described this to students, I taught a course at the Magic Castle for a couple years about going from close-up to stand-up. And the course that and one of the things I said was like, we could stop all of this right now if you just build a really good 20 minutes of stand-up material, do it in parlor situations for small groups, and slowly increase your group size as you're doing it. That is essentially the secret. Learning that you're not going to get the laugh at the exact same place. You're not going to get the moment of astonishment at the moment you always thought it was going to be. There's going to be little tweaks, and there might be microseconds. There might be literally like tiny little tweaks that happen, but that feeling is always going to be different. So the way that I would describe this is if you're already going around and doing close-up magic at a walk-around gig or whatever, grab a bunch of people, put them down in chairs around you, stand up in front of them, and do some more magic, but now do it in a more presentational setting. And that's going to help you get used to it. And the more you keep doing it, the more you're able to actually build stuff up. Then you can then start adding where you're having to then worry about increasing your the size of the props and or visibility issues and things of that nature. And so now it starts going from parlor. If you build this really good parlor show, that parlor show with usually just minor tweaks could be then transferred to being more of a stand-up show.
It's amazing. Another way that I've heard that piece of advice, which is similar to what you said, is that when you're doing, let's say, restaurants, experiment with performing from more than one table at a time. Because it kind of builds that, if there's a bigger group or if there's two tables, you can kind of get that growth where you have to make sure to look to the left and look to the right, and make eye contact with different people and sort of, I love the way that you said it of like, hypothetically, if I could do the show for a week for 5 people and then a week for 7 people and then a week for 10 people, it would be seamless. We wouldn't notice those changes because I would just slowly learn the difference between we as a group of 4 and we as a group of 40. And they're a little bit different the way that you expect their responses in the conversation.
Right. And that's a big thing. You're hitting exactly on it. What happens between conversational and presentational versus close-up versus a parlor is that when you're performing for a group of people, they're still individuals. When you're performing for a group of people and you're right in among them, they feel more individualistic. They feel like they're more apt because they're individuals to respond, to do something, to participate. But once you have sort of put the invisible wall barrier up between you and them, they now congeal as one group. And now they are waiting on the others in the group for the time for them to applaud or react or whatever. They feel more like they have to be part of the herd as opposed to an individual. And then you're going then from performing for a group of individuals to one party. And once you understand that in your head, that is a huge long way to going to understanding why it's going to feel different when you perform in parlor versus close-up.
Yeah, it's like an audience of 50 people is like one 100-eyed beast.
Yeah.
That you need to react that same way. In that same sense, we've spoken a little bit about the transition from close up to stage. I'd love to hear about how you've used some of those tools to start making solutions in the virtual space. Is it something that you like, and how have you used those tools to make some transitions? Like pretty much everybody, I was building that plane as it was taking off. I was saying that I was doing virtual shows when I really, probably had no business saying that. And I was building the show as I came along, and I learned very quickly what worked and what didn't work in that world, and then also what I needed to improve upon. And the first thing I realized after, doing this on like, an MacBook Air is that if I was going to do the kind of show that I was going to want to charge the significant amount of money for, the kind of money that was going to be the same money that I would get for a corporate gig if I was doing it in person, and be able to actually have a product that was worth that I needed to invest into myself and into the product. So I really started. So I bought a brand new iMac, and I
I really started learning as much as I possibly could about software. The OBS software that I'm using is Ecamm. But now I have like really, I think, a smart use of Ecamm. I have some really interesting transitions. I took those online courses to learn how to like in Keynote make slides that I could then use as transitions in Ecamm to do borders and icons and all that kind of stuff to like give the show a professional look, so that when I said this is a customized TV show, that is bespoke just for you guys, that they believed that they actually had proof of that, and it wasn't just me speaking, in one camera cut for an hour, which is absolutely, boring as all get out. So I think the tech aspect and playing with the tech aspect, I realized that was the case. Then I also realized that that essentially in video chat magic or whatever platform you're doing it on, most people are doing it in Zoom, that if I was going to do something that I didn't feel like just performing the same kind of magic that I was doing that I had to do for a large scale crowd was going to work, because it really put me smaller in the frame, and it didn't have a sense of intimacy, and it didn't have a sense of interaction the same way it would in an audience where it's live, because they're not looking at a tiny screen, right? And so I felt like if I was just going to go up and do my stand-up act, that I was essentially using an IMAX camera to film a stage play, and that seemed ridiculous. So a lot of the material that I ended up doing was even when I do quote unquote stand-up bits that I would then eventually, after we all transition out of this and go back to doing works on real stages again, stuff that I could, with a few tweaks, would be able to put on an actual stage. Those moments I do, in like essentially in one, like I do it in camera shot, and here's the thing, and I'm interacting with this person, and that feels much very, very close and very intimate, and yet it appeals to everybody. And then the moments that I'm going to do that are a close up, which is something that I do on stage anyway with a camera and screen. I just would play those camera and screen moments the same way that I would if I was on stage, meaning that like I know they're watching a camera anyway, and I know that whatever is going to be in that frame is the only thing they can see. So that's where I'm going to play, and that's where I'm going to make sure that they're seeing the magic that is right there at that moment. So a lot of close-up magic plays far stronger because everybody has the exact same view as everybody else. And once you understand that everybody has the exact same view, because this is not true in a live audience, but everybody on screen has the exact same view as everybody else, then that opens you up to being able to explore lots of different magic that you wouldn't really think of that would appeal necessarily on a platform show.
How much magic we all said, but it's not practical, and we erased from our memory. And now we're going, shit, give me all that non-practical stuff back. That's that's what we need. It's kind of, you can pull off a lot of non-practical things and strange, crazy thread setups or whatever, weird technologies and anything that we can all get done. You mentioned for me to remind you about the Ecamm tip. Hit us with it.
Sure. Okay. So if you are a Mac guy who's already doing Ecamm and you are on the biggest thing that I can say to anybody is people have a tendency to talk about internet strength, and that is obviously some of it, but you really need to have RAM. You need to have RAM. And I would recommend at least 16 gigs of RAM, if not 32 gigs of RAM. I'm using 32 gigs of RAM. Two things that I would say about this. There's a program called Clean My Mac. And it allows you that when you have it open to give you a little dashboard. And that dashboard will tell you exactly what your internet speed is and how much RAM that you have left on your computer. So right in the middle of the show, you can see if you are where you are and if you're going to have problems with what's going on. And then you can transfer out to whatever backups you have. So it's a really good tool. Also, it allows you to then optimize your RAM so that you can then clear out other stuff and then put all the RAM that you need into whatever video platform that you're using, in this case, Zoom. Okay, so that's one. Two, the other thing I would recommend is that it is very easy to get people on screen and have complete control of it and never use Spotlight. And what you do is if you have an iMac and then you have an iPad, All right. So I have the iPad. And on the iPad, I use the built-in software that allows you to turn your iPad into a second screen. So now I've turned the iPad into a second screen. I set up Zoom so that Zoom gives me, when I have a second screen open, it opens up a second screen for me to actually have a second window in the Zoom program. So now I have two completely different Zoom windows. I have a Zoom window here that is the main one with all the people in it, and then a separate Zoom window that is only showing the person that is highlighted or that you have pinned to that screen. Okay? So I got one here and one here. All right? So now I plug that iPad into the computer as a camera input. It shows up in Ecamm as a camera input, meaning that now it shows the feed of my second screen. If I pin somebody onto the second screen, I then can bring them into the Ecamm and do all the Ecamm stuff, moving them around or whatever, and I'm in complete control of it. So all I have to do is switch out by saying, I push the button and change second screen, and then pin to second screen, whatever person I'm choosing. So I can say, I want to choose this person, and I've already set them up, and all I'm doing is hitting the button in Ecamm, so then their picture shows up on the screen next to me in the newscaster kind of setup. So I never have to deal with any kind of I don't have to deal with a tech or dealing with Spotlight or anything like that. It's all set just in Ecamm.
I love it. I will share one other little thought about Ecamm, which is first of all, everything you said is completely correct, and I've experienced all of it. But what I wanted to share about the RAM, and then we'll get off all of the techie stuff because some people have fallen asleep. But with respect to the RAM, everything you said is completely true. And I'm going to do a big giant warning and say, if you're at the beginning of your journey of doing virtual and you're deciding between Ecamm and OBS, even though I love Ecamm, I think it's simple and easy to do, I would recommend OBS for the reason of Ecamm is a RAM suck, and every single person I know that has fallen in love with Ecamm has then gone ahead and updated their computer and bought a new computer to accommodate for the Ecamm, including myself. So I'm using Ecamm now. It's amazing. It's awesome. I'm glad we have a new computer for our virtual setup because we do lots of virtual shows and it's great and we've got a beautiful virtual setup. But that being said, if you are somehow at the beginning of the journey and deciding, I might recommend that you go with OBS because I think it's a little bit less of a RAM suck. And I think that's part of like Ecamm being so simple and easy to use is part of, I think, what slows it down.
Yeah. There's trade-offs because that's the thing you just said for sure is it is really easy to use. And because it's so easy to use, it also that's the benefit for someone who's getting into it. But I could see the RAM suck thing for sure.
For sure. Let's chat a little bit about Fool Us. You know, I heard a statement about Fool Us. I think it came from Brent Braun, and he said that, you know, if you go into this, and it could be from someone else, so apologies if this wasn't Brent, but if you go into an amazing, big, giant TV spot unprepared for what it will bring, then it will not bring anything. You know, it will not be a giant thing that changes your career. It will not be, but if you're prepared, if you know what you're stepping into, if you nail it on your spot, if you are also ready to receive the inbound in a way, if things look good by the time that things air, then it could be a really, really positive position. So I'd love to hear about, you know, I think it was an all-star performance, and I'd love to hear about the performance in a minute, but talk to me a little bit about how being on that show changed or didn't change the scope of your career.
I mean, it is definitely before Fool Us and after Fool Us, you know, with maybe a tiny bit of, you know, before Tiny Plunger, but, you know, after Tiny Plunger. You know, I won Close-Up Magician of the Year at the Magic Castle in 2006 before the Tiny Plunger was part of my act, before I had created any of that stuff. And I was on the cover of Genie before that. All of that was, so I had actually had some success. My L&L DVDs have nothing to do with the plunger, so on and so forth. So I had magic, quote unquote, magic success before that. I then developed the Tiny Plunger thing, and it became, you know, something that I was became very well known for among magicians. And then we put out the Tiny Plunger product with Matthew Bish, you know, who created the original principle. We created that product, And that product sold okay. It sold just okay. And I always knew that it was going to be, that it was a good thing, and it was a big part of my shows, and it was the thing that got me into the door. So I knew that it was a big deal. So cut to about 2 years later, 2 years after the release of the product, I get a call from Fool Us, and this is when they were the first year that they were actually going to start actually filming magicians in America. The first American season was basically a cut show of the British stuff, and the second season was going to be new stuff with the magicians in North America. They called me and they say, "Hi, Johnny Thompson wants you to come and do that plunger trick on Fool Us." And I said, "Sure." And that was that. Like a lot of these, people ask me often, like, "How did you get it Fool Us?" And I go, "Johnny Thompson saw the plunger and asked me to do it. That's it. That's the end of it." So I ended up doing that, knowing that there was no audition that they didn't want. They knew that they had seen me do this trick. They knew that they wanted it, and that's what they wanted me to do on TV. So already I knew I was in a good position. So it wasn't that kind of thing where I had to be like submit a bunch of stuff or anything like that. So knowing that was going to happen, I made sure that it looked good on TV. So now I then planned how it was going to look, how the performance was going to happen. And I know that I couldn't do like the full 10-minute version of it because in my act, it's 10 minutes. I knew I had to slim it down. So I cut out the parts and the lines that, slimmed it down to about 6 minutes. And that was what I was going to do with it. And I let myself these pathways that I normally wouldn't do, pathways where I was hoping stuff would happen, where reactions would happen, or that teller would pick up the plunger and put it on his head himself. These pathways that normally would happen, because I didn't want to have to be the one just sticking on teller's head. I didn't want to do that. I knew that like that would seem maybe disrespectful. So this way, if he did it to himself, it would get the gag across, but at the same time, so I had all this laid out and I thought about it. And so I went in to do the show, and I'd filmed myself multiple times, multiple angles doing it. And then I went into the show, and just some people know this, but you go in, you do a taping, or at least back then, I don't know how they're doing it now with the COVID protocols, but you would do a taping of the show of your act just for Mike Close and a few other producers. So Mike Close, the guy who advocates that stuff, you would do that for him, and he would go, "Yes, yay, nay, you might want to do this, you might want to do that." And then I just did it the way that I filmed it. And they said, "Okay, great. That's perfect. Do that." And so I was prepared. And then I went in and I did it. And it worked out exactly the way that I had planned, because I had planned so thoroughly. And I had already set up knowing that this was going to then be, because you don't know when you film it whether you're going to get to air. They tell you in advance, but they don't tell you like months in advance. They tell you like weeks in advance. So as soon as I knew that it was going to air, I then made sure that like there was a shit ton of plungers in production to be able to then get those things sold again. And then that year, the tiny plunger became the highest selling trick of that entire year, even though it was 2 years old.
It's so interesting to see the scope of when things are interesting within the magic community, and then when they like go, viral. Just as a funny thing to echo it, by the time Shin Lim made it to America's Got Talent, the magic community has seen his dream act like many times over, from awards and from Fool Us so it's funny that, a plunger trick that was a few years old, which is what got you there, by way of, Johnny Thompson saying, "I want that trick on the show." Then it's like, it's got like almost a whole new rebirth, and it did. And it's very exciting. And I have one, and it's sitting on my mantle right in front of me. And it's awesome.
And I knew that once I had that clip, that I could put that clip into things because I have somebody who is universally respected, not saying, but like, being very enthusiastic about what I'm doing. And then I have somebody who's universally known to be hard to please, saying, "I love this act. This is my favorite act. This is the this is the greatest thing I've ever seen." Like, and I didn't fool them, but it completely like made my career. So then when I was able to then take that clip and then take a footage of me doing the trick on a camera and a screen for a large audience, and then cut that into moments of me doing stand-up in other TV appearances I've done, as well as in other live audiences. Putting it all together as a package immediately got me in the door. That's what got me on the Disney Cruise Line. That's what got me in. That's what got me into every major agency that I'm in. That got me in everywhere. That one thing, because I knew that having those people say such good things about me. Because let's be honest, man, you can watch a lot of Fool Us clips, and the response can go anywhere from "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. I love you," right, to "That was cute, but you did this." You know what I mean? And so, like, it's not like they are enthusiastic about everything. And I think that helped sell me very, very, very strongly in ways that nothing that I could have ever done would have. You know what I mean? Like no testimonial from Ed from Accounting, who I did their last year's Christmas party, is going to be as impressive as a testimonial from them. You know, and so I have that, and I have this clip of me doing the trick on the Today Show with Kathy Lee and Huda, who are again notorious for effing with magicians, saying how great I am. So that was, I think, what got me in the door and was allowing me to then, once I was there, to prove myself. You know, you go nowhere, especially with, in this case, Disney Cruise Line, if you don't have the act once they put you on the stage. They never book anybody for more than one. At first, they never book anybody more than one at a time. You know what I mean? Like, here, you get your 1 week, and then we'll get reviews back from that 1 week, and then we'll see if we give you another week. And that's how they are. So from where I finally ended up, which was basically doing a 7-month contract, week on, week off, all in the books, that was because once I was on that stage, I then proved myself, you know, and I had techniques about that too. Like, everyone remembered the plunger, right? So I made these little pins that say "Member of the Tiny Plunger Fan Club," and I would give these away to kids that would come up on stage. And so the people for the rest of the cruise were wearing this badge of, you know, the whole time. I had the plunger sign autographs after the show by taking a little stamping pad and putting it on and then stamping. And these kids have autograph books with Mickey and Minnie and everything else in them. And I would do that. And I would also give these cards that was like a picture of like a fuzzed out me and then a very clear plunger. I have one. I have one. Oh, you have that. And I give autographs of that. And so people were going, and I just gave them that was my own. Disney didn't pay that back for me. That's absolutely my own cost. But I knew that was going to help improve my ratings because they instantly could see, oh, wait a minute.
That's the guy who gave out all the things and did all the signatures and da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, and it immediately made me seem like a nicer guy who makes me feel more like a friend. And my whole point is, like, the way to get people to want to hire you is to make them feel like you've made a connection, a friendship connection with them. Another thing I did in my stage shows was I would say, if you see me around the ship and I'm not stuffing food in my face, come up to me, say hi, I would love to talk to you, and in fact, ask me to do some magic for you, and I will. And just because I would say that, occasionally, yeah, people would come up, but just because I said it, everyone believed it, that I was walking around everywhere just doing magic
all the time, right?
All the time, and it made people think, oh, hey, he's a nice guy who just wants to show us cool things, and that just improved my ratings, and that was all part of it. So going back to the Fool Us, the plunger allowed me to then basically market myself in ways that I never would have been able to without that clip, without that recognition. And it has become essentially the money-making force of my life.
Wow. It's amazing that tiny little plunger has made such a big impact. How did the conception of that idea come to be? How did the plunger come about? Well, I mean, to be clear, you know, the principle... The principle of like cards sticking together if you lift up quickly was originally published in Apocalypse. Matthew Beach rediscovered that principle on his own using a thing with a sticky tack and a pin. You would put sticky tack on the bottom of a pin and lift up. And he had a routine published that used that as a way to lift up a number of cards. For me, though, unaware of Matthew's thing, I was really into the Bob King guess your weight routine, where someone would name a number of cards and they would cut off the number of cards. And the most popular version of that was Pitt Hardling's flick routine, where you would use your finger and flip it up and then it would be the number.
and I became a big fan of that. And I was at a comic book convention because that's where I spent a lot of time, or at least used to. And I saw on a table this little iPhone stand plunger. And it is the first time I'd ever seen a suction cup actually be able to really suck. So I brought out my deck of cards and I started playing with it. And I realized instantly that it had this ability to actually hold more cards. And so I was playing with that principle. I basically came up with the entire routine that I still do to this day in like a weekend, the core of it, and started playing around with it and showing it to people. And people were like, this is great. This is awesome. And then someone tipped me off. I would think it was Garrett Thomas actually tipped me off to the idea that Matthew had that thing. And I spoke to Matthew and we talked about it. And we now to this day consider it sort of co-creation, my prop and my routine, and then his basic idea of applying it to all these things. And he got there first. We worked on the project, but my routine didn't change really at all. And it became like this thing where the only tweaks to it were when I then had to put it. So I made it play for a large group on camera. So I had to make sure I needed to tweak it for that, and how the plunger would play, putting it on their head and all those different things. And I've even tweaked it now that it works on visual shows. So because I have that iPad I was telling you about where I pin somebody, I take the iPad, I hold the iPad, and I take the plunger, and then remember that they're pinned onto this
hilarious.
iPad, and I put it onto the iPad and do the exact same gag, but do it onto
Very
the
funny.
iPad. Yeah. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I think it's a perfect transition to talk about the last question, which is, you've been through many changes as we spoke about, and you've shared some of the highs and lows and challenges. And I think you've kind of got your ear to the ground about what is happening right now. So I'd love to know, where do you think Magic is going? Do you think there's going to be a lot of virtual? Do you think in-person's coming back soon? I mean, I guess it's a question about COVID, but where do you think it's all going? How much do you think virtual is here to stay?
Man, I don't know. I mean, that ends up getting into like, how things are going to go with the U.S. election.
Yeah.
That goes into things about like just how people are going to take it.
Yeah.
How things are going to come down to when it comes to like if people will actually take it seriously. I mean, there's still people who deny it, but the thing is like most industries like ours, like when it comes to live performing, are not really coming back anytime soon. It probably will not come back until a vaccine is widely distributed. That said, like I did a lecture for the Magic Circle recently, and I came up with a lecture where it's like, here's a bunch of really cool virtual things with small tweaks will totally work in real life. So the idea is like I would build a lot of material now. If I was your listening audience, I would build material now that plays virtually, but then one day you don't have to jettison it. You can then actually do it for live people again with a tweak, or maybe you could just do it exactly the same way. But the point being is that I wouldn't just create for the virtual space. I would create for both, with the hope that you'd be able to get some live shows. And then with the hope that maybe the virtual shows can continue, because honestly, the virtual shows are a good thing. I like doing them. And even if it only becomes like a 25% of the market, that's far more of the market than it used to be, right? And it's something to still be able to play around with even once we get back to quote unquote real life.
Totally. I love that. And I think that kind of gives people in both directions some room to play with. And I think that's the first time I've heard that piece of advice, where if you're going to develop material, see if you can make it something that can develop for both places. As we near the end of the episode, there are some wrap-up questions that we ask on each and every episode. And this is one of them. So let's start with the endless chain. In order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest that would be wonderful for the show. Who would be a wonderful addition to the Discourse in Magic podcast?
Taylor Hughes.
Beautiful. That's a wonderful suggestion. The next one is a question about modern Magic. Obviously, we've seen Magic change a lot in the last 6 to 8 months, and I expect it to change even more in the next 6 to 8 months. What's something that you like about the way that Magic's changed, and what's something that you don't like about modern Magic?
What I like is that I think that we have shown very quickly that we can be adaptable. I think that is something to be proud of, that we're able to adapt to this weirdness as well as we have. And what I don't like about it is the opposite. Those who are still so unwilling to actually adapt anything or create in this space, and look so down on it that look down on those who are creating in this space. It makes no sense to me.
I think that's right on the money about what's happening right now, and I love the feedback. The next thing is plugs. Where can people find you, and where can people find your things, your plungers?
Well, you go to Cosmo Magic. You can buy the plungers from cosmomagic.com. That's where you can buy that trick. If you want to just get in contact with me, if you're working on a virtual show and need help or direction, I will give private tutoring on that. You can just reach me at my website, which is cardjon, cardjon.com, cardjon.com.
I love it. That is very wonderful. Thank you so much. And the last thing before we go, and I think everyone should go own themselves a tiny plunger. I think it's cool, and it sits on my mantelpiece. It's a talking piece, and someone says, "Oh, what's that?" And I say it's for a very small toilet. And then I give them some cards, and it's great. It's wonderful. I love when people ask me about it, and it just sits there. But the last thing that I wanted to ask is the take home point. People have listened to us talk about magic for a while now. Lots of different aspects we spoke about, which is wonderful and incredible and amazing. And if people are to think back to this episode and remember one thing, take one thing home with them that is the most important for them to remember, to keep with them, to think back when they think of this episode, what should that one thing be?
To really think about how they feel as well as the audience feels when performing magic. The best way to understand an audience is to understand how you feel from their reactions, as well as how they're feeling from what you're doing. That's what I would say.
I think it's amazing. And I think I've watched you perform at the castle. I've seen you perform in many ways. And because of the volume of what you're doing and the attention to detail, kind of what we've spoken about. Every time you do it, it gets a little bit better, just by paying attention every time you do the act. And it's a pleasure to see you live. I hope I can see you live again. Thank you so much, or virtually. And thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity. This was lovely.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. Take a moment and ask yourself, is there one person in my life, one magician in my life who would really, really benefit from this episode, or at the very least, benefit from this message? Give them a call, tell them what you learned, and you don't even have to tell them where you learned it from. You can say you made it up. I don't care. But if you do send people here, it would mean the world. They can learn just like you are, and we can all be one big, giant, magic, happy family. Thanks so much for being here. Love you lots, and I'll see you next Thursday. Peace.